If you spent any time researching required minimum distributions recently, you've probably been told not to worry about them. You'll hear that the percentage is small, the standard deduction covers a big chunk of it, the age has been pushed back recently, and for most people, it's just a return of your own money on a predetermined schedule. And all those statements are absolutely true. I've been a financial planner here in California for a long time. I've worked with hundreds of families, I've built hundreds of retirement income plans, and I want to be careful here because honestly, I agree with the math, I just don't agree with the conclusion, and the reason is very specific. Everybody making that argument is running the calculation based only on year one. They take your balance, they divide it by the number that the IRS gives you at age 75, and the result is a totally manageable number, and then they just stop. Nobody seems to run this calculation for years 10 or years 20. And the reason that that's so important is that every year that you get older, you're required to distribute a larger and larger portion of your account, whether you want the money or not. So today, I want to show you what happens to the numbers when you keep calculating and look at this over a full retirement. Not only that, we're going to show you what lands on top of it when you get to the end of retirement, and why the years where you can still do something about it are the same years where it seems like there's nothing to worry about. Now, I'll be honest with you before we start. There is a group of people who can genuinely ignore all this immediately and toss it all aside, and I'll show you how to determine whether that's you. But there's one calculation we need to run first, and it's not the one that everybody else has been telling you about. And real quick, if you want somebody to run these numbers for your own accounts, this is the stuff my team and I do every single day. There's a link in the description. Feel free to book a call with us and we're happy to chat. Let me start by showing you the math that everybody's doing because I want you to see that it's honest work. Under the current rules, you have to start taking money out of your tax-deferred accounts in the year that you turn 75 if you were born in 1960 or later. If you were born before 1960, you have to start taking money out at age 73. Now that's true of all your tax-deferred accounts like traditional IRAs, 401ks, simple IRAs, SEP IRAs, all that kind of stuff. So the calculation is one step. You take your account balance at the end of the previous year based on whatever's on the statement, and then you divide it by your life expectancy that the IRS gives you. Now, currently, in the year that you turn 75, that number is 24.6. So you take your account balance, you divide it by 24.6, it works out to just a hair more than 4% of the account. That's what you're required to distribute. So on a $1 million account, your first year distribution requirement is very close to $40,000. And for a lot of retired folks, that's pretty close to the amount that they had planned to take out anyway. And then you add in the standard deduction, which is considerably larger than it used to be for people 65 years old and older, and a big chunk of that year one distribution isn't even taxable to you. So that's the argument, and it's a fair one. If that were the only year that we were concerned about over your entire retirement, I'd tell you to quit worrying and go enjoy your retirement. But look at what we just did here. We calculated 1 year and then we drew a conclusion about the next 25. The required distributions here are not a flat line. That divisor that I mentioned, that 24.6 at age 75, that's based on your life expectancy. So every year that you get older, your life expectancy goes down by roughly 1. And the portion of your account, the percentage, which started at a little bit more than 4%, that doesn't stay consistent. That grows every single year. You have to take out more and more and more of your account from that point on over the rest of your life. Nobody's hiding that. It often just gets missed or omitted in the calculation because a lot of people focus on the distribution need in year one only and ignore what happens thereafter. So let's keep going. So let's put some real numbers to this. I want to introduce you to a hypothetical couple, Alan and Cheryl Braddock. They're both 66 years old and they live up in the Roseville area, which is a suburb of Sacramento and not too far from where I live. Alan spent 31 years as an engineer at a local utility company. Cheryl worked as a pharmacy technician at a hospital. They're careful people. They still drive a car that has 140,000 miles on it just because it runs fine. They have about $700,000 saved up between Alan's old 401k and a couple traditional IRAs, about $140,000 in Roth accounts, and $90,000 in a few taxable brokerage accounts. They spend about $6,800 a month, which works out to slightly more than $81,000 a year. Between the two of them, they have Social Security benefits of about $5,400 a month. Here's what happens to that $700,000 between now, age 66, and age 75. And I want to be totally clear about this assumption because it does a lot of work. We're assuming that this portfolio will grow at an average annual rate of 6%. Now, it's very unlikely that there's ever going to be a year where the portfolio actually get 6%, but we'll come back to that at the end of the video. They're barely touching it. So by the time Alan turns 75, it's had 9 years to compound and has a balance of a little bit more than $1 million. And here's the thing, nobody would look at that and say that it's not manageable. They're taking $41,000 out of the account. Yes, it's $20,000 more than they need to spend, but the vast majority of that is getting eaten up by the standard deduction, plus maybe the enhanced senior deduction if they're over 65. The rest of it is taxed at low brackets. That's very manageable. The second here is the balance. If you're only taking out 4% in year one, but the account's growing at 6%, well, the balance is going to continue rising. So look at what that means. Social Security is doing most of the heavy lifting. Their Social Security benefits account for most of what they need to spend. They're taking about $16,800 per year out of their account. And they feel responsible doing that. That's the instinct that built the account. And I want to point something out about the $700,000. If you've watched other videos on this topic, that amount is squarely inside the amount where a lot of other videos will tell you it's not enough money to even worry about. It's under $1 million. You're in the lower tax brackets. The amount that you need to take out for spending is roughly in line with what's going to be forced out anyway. So let's test all that. Their first required distribution is that number divided by 24.6, which comes out very close to $41,000. Now compare that to what they actually need out of the portfolio. Today, they're distributing $16,800. And if you inflate that forward, in this year, when Alan turns 75, he'll need about $21,000 out of the accounts to meet their spending needs. So in year one, the IRS is going to be pushing $41,000 out of the accounts, which is about $20,000 more than they actually need. But now watch what happens to that dollar amount over time, because two different factors push the number up. The first is the divisor. The amount that he had to divide by in year one was 24.6, but by the time Alan's 80 years old, that goes down to 20.2. And then at 85, it goes down to 16, and by the time he's 90, it's 12.2. So the percentage that you're forced to take out starts at a little bit more than 4%, but then it goes up to 5, and then to 6, and then it jumps to 8, and continues climbing over the rest of your life. So let me show you where this lands. That first year distribution requirement of $41,000 grows all the way to about $68,000 by the time Alan's 85 years old. And now look at the balance of the account. The account at that point is actually up to $1.1 million because the growth has kept pace with the distribution requirements. So let's sit with that for a second. We're 10 years in. Alan and Cheryl are now forced to take out about 2/3 more than they were in year one on an account that's actually grown in value. Nothing's gone wrong here. Nothing's been mismanaged at all. That's simply what the schedule does. If we push it out another 5 years to age 90, the required distribution in that years is about $85,000. That's more than double where we started with, and the balance hasn't even meaningfully moved. Now, I've spent the better part of my career watching people argue about what the actual safe withdrawal rate is. Is it 4%? Is 5% pushing it? Nobody out there is saying that 8% is conservative, but that's the schedule. It's not optional. Everything that we just looked at is one half of the picture, and it's the half that gets all the attention. The other half is what happens to what they actually need out of the portfolio on an annual basis. Now, their spending needs do go up every year by the rate of inflation. That's real. But look what happens to their Social Security. They also get a cost of living adjustment for their Social Security benefits every single year. So most of that inflation is being absorbed by their floor as opposed to by the portfolio. So the amount they actually need out of the portfolio barely moves. They start out with a year one distribution need of about $21,000. That only grows to about $27,000 10 years later. Let's call that a 30% increase. Meanwhile, the forced withdrawal went up from about $41,000 to about $68,000. That's an increase of 41%. So both of these lines are climbing, but one of them is climbing a lot faster than the other, and it's the one that they don't control. In year one, there's a difference of about $20,000 between what the IRS pushes out of their account and what they actually wanted to spend. That gap grows to about $41,000, more than doubles only 10 years later. And every dollar of it is income that they didn't ask for landing on their tax return. And that's before you account for something we see constantly in our practice. There's a stretch early in retirement where people tend to spend quite a bit more because they have time on their hands, they have energy. Now they can finally get to those projects that they've been putting off, take those trips that they've always wanted to do, all those bucket list items. But that stretch doesn't last forever, and people tend to slow down at some point. And for most, by the time you get into your mid-80s, you're spending less in real terms than you did when you were 66. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody plan for that, and it's not even a bad thing. But if it does happen to Alan and Cheryl, their portfolio need doesn't go up by 30% over the first decade. It stays closer to flat or maybe even falls, while their distribution requirement keeps climbing higher and higher and higher. So one blade of this opens on its own, the second one makes it worse. Which brings us to why this argument sounds so convincing when you're 75. The claim that required distributions can be completely fine because they roughly match what you spend, that can be absolutely accurate in year 1, but completely wrong by year 10. Not because anybody's being dishonest or doing anything wrong, but because you're comparing two numbers that rise at drastically different speeds and marking them on the one day at the very beginning when they happen to be the closest. That's the whole reason this looks like there's nothing to worry about at the exact moment when you can still do something about it. That rising withdrawal doesn't land on an empty tax return, it lands on top of other things. And a couple of them behave in a way that makes that escalation particularly expensive. Start with Medicare. What you pay for Medicare Parts B and D depends on your income. And once your income passes certain thresholds, you have to pay a surcharge on top of that ordinary premium. Most people think of this as a line that you either cross or you don't cross, but that's not quite reality. These premium surcharges lie in many different tiers, and if your required distributions continue escalating upward, it's not as if you climb into one of these tiers and just kind of settle in. You keep marching higher into the higher tiers and are forced to pay more and more for Medicare over time. Not only that, but it's assessed on your income from 2 years prior. So by the time you get the bill for these surcharges and find yourself in those tiers where you're paying more for Medicare, it's based on a withdrawal that you've already stopped thinking about. That same escalation affects how much of your Social Security gets taxed. That depends on your total income. And as your required distributions climb, more of your income gets pulled onto the taxable side of the ledger. So it's not just that you're paying tax on the distribution itself, it's that you're paying more tax on the benefits that you were already receiving. And there's one more, which is the one that concerns me the most because of when it tends to arrive. While you're both alive, you file your taxes jointly with really wide brackets. But after the first one in the household passes, the surviving spouse at that point files as a single filer, and the brackets are exactly half of what they are of a married couple. The Medicare premium surcharge brackets are cut in half. Your standard deduction is cut in half. But the required withdrawal doesn't shrink. It stays the same or even grows because it's based on account balance, and account balance doesn't care what happens. So the survivor is stuck taking the largest distributions of their life under the narrowest tax brackets that they've ever filed under. And statistically, that tends to happen in the stretch of years where the escalation has already done its work. It's the largest number meeting the smallest brackets, and the timing of that isn't a coincidence. Now, if you'd like to see what this projection looks like for your own accounts, there's a link in the description. My team and I do this all day, every day. Feel free to book a call with us. Now, I want to be totally fair, and there is a group of people who can stop worrying about this and put all this aside entirely. I'd be doing you a disservice if I pretended otherwise. If your projected required withdrawal still fits inside what you're going to spend anyway, it's not a distribution requirement. It's just your income showing up on a schedule that somebody else set. You were taking that money out regardless. The requirement is just paperwork at that point, so you can stop reading articles about it. But notice the test. It's not whether your first distribution fits inside what you were planning on spending, it's whether the one at 85 does. So here's what I'd actually have you do. Take your tax-deferred account balance and project it forward by whatever growth rate you're comfortable with and figure out what your projected balance is going to be at age 75. Divide that number by 24.6 and you have your first year distribution requirement, which is the number that everybody else has already shown you. Then project that forward another 10 years, include the growth of the account, the distributions every year, divide the account balance in that year by 16, this is in the year you turn 85, and determine what that number is. And then compare the second number for when you're in your mid-80s to your projected spending at that time. Not the first number when you're 75, the second number when you're 85. If it still fits, you're genuinely done. Go enjoy your retirement. I mean that. If it doesn't fit, you don't have a tax problem in year one, you have a timing problem. And the good news is that you're finding out about it while you can still do something about it. Now, I want to address one thing directly because it's the reason that the reassuring version sounds so convincing. You may have heard that a withdrawal based on a percentage of what's left can never work itself down to zero. That's completely true, and it's arithmetic as opposed to opinion. When markets fall, the required dollar amount falls with them. The schedule is self-correcting and it will not make you broke. That's exactly why people relax about it, but it's answering a question that nobody really should have been asking in the first place. The schedule protects your balance and really does nothing at all for your tax return. It cannot make you run out of money, but it absolutely can make you overtaxed for a period of 10 years or 20 years. Those are two completely different problems. And the reassuring answer to the first one has actually been doing double duty as an answer to the second. So let's say you run that projection and the number at age 85 is well above what you expect to spend. The question is what it costs you to wait, and the answer isn't the tax in any one year. Every dollar you take out of the account now doesn't just remove a dollar from your future requirement. It removes the dollar and everything else it would have grown into. For Alan and Cheryl, today at 66, a dollar taken out today is roughly the same amount as $1.59 taken out at age 75 when their mandatory distributions start if they get 6% per year. So the value of acting decays, and it actually decays a little faster than most people expect. It's not that waiting around is neutral until 75 and then becomes a problem. Waiting costs you something every year, and the cost of the last year before you act is a lot less than the cost of the first year, and the levers themselves disappear rather than shrinking gracefully. Right now, Alan and Cheryl are in the widest tax brackets they'll ever file under, with no forced income before Medicare surcharges are even in play. That's a specific set of circumstances, and it's not going to last. At 75, the forced income starts, and at the first death, their tax brackets get cut in half. Every single one of those is a door closing, and none of them are going to reopen. That's why I keep saying that the years where this looks like there's nothing to worry about are the years when you can still make a change to the outcome. By the time the number is big enough to be obviously painful, the tools you can use to fix them have closed behind you. So if I were Alan or Cheryl, here's the order I would work in. The first thing is to run the projection we just talked about, all the way to 85 and 90, not just 75. Not because those far out numbers are going to be precise, but because the shape of the line tells you whether this is going to be a problem. If the line stays under your spending, you're done. You don't have an issue. But if the line crosses above what you're planning to spend, you know what problem you're going to solve. The second thing is to stop treating the pre-tax accounts as untouchable. There are years right now where drawing money out of those accounts deliberately at a rate you choose could save you money compared to having it forced out of the account at a rate that you're stuck with. That could mean funding your spending from one of these tax-deferred accounts as opposed to one of the brokerage accounts. It could mean converting some of it. Which one fits depends entirely on your numbers, and it's a real analysis as opposed to some rule of thumb. The third thing, and this is the one that a lot of people skip, is to model what it looks like for the survivor. Not as a morbid exercise, but because it's the single largest tax event that one might plan for in this situation. Now, a couple small things that wind up costing people money for no reason at all once the distributions start. If you have several different 401k plans from old employers, you need to know that they don't work exactly the same way that IRAs do. With IRAs, you can total up a bunch of different accounts and take a distribution from one of them that satisfies your requirement for the whole lot. Workplace 401k and 403b plans generally have to satisfy the distribution requirement one by one. So somebody with money in 3 old plans who takes a distribution based on the balance from all 3, but from one of the plans, will have 1 taxable distribution and then 2 that are going to be attached with the penalty. And if you're charitably inclined, remember that the order of operations here matters. Giving to charity directly from your IRA is a great way to satisfy the distribution requirement in a way to where the distribution doesn't show up as income. That's a legitimately great tool. That being said, the first dollars coming out of your account every year are the ones that count toward your requirement. So if you decide to take your distribution out in February, and then you would turn around and give to a charity out of your IRA in October, the October distribution might not help you at all. That's a decision you should make at the beginning of the year. There's no fixing it later on when you file your return. Now, I do have one caveat to all this because we're making a whole bunch of assumptions to get to these numbers. We're assuming a steady rate of return of 6% every single year, rain or shine, no matter what. That's never going to happen. We're also assuming that the tables and the tax brackets and the tiers and the thresholds also stay relatively consistent over the full 25-year period. There's no telling whether that might be true. So please don't necessarily take Alan and Cheryl's numbers and their situation and apply it directly to your own. What I take from this isn't necessarily the numbers, it's that the direction of the line isn't in question. The percentage is going to rise on you every single year, and whether or not that becomes a problem depends on a calculation that not a whole lot of people out there run. So that's why I don't think you can look at a year one calculation here and just call the whole situation handled. The number that everybody shows you is real, it just happens to be the smallest one that you're ever going to see. But here's the thing. Once you run the projection and you see that line climbing above what you actually plan to spend, the next logical question is, well, what are we going to do about it? The strategy that you'll hear over and over again that everybody's going to recommend is a Roth IRA conversion. It's genuinely powerful, but it's also one that gets recommended too frequently, I think. It really only works when a specific handful of conditions are met, and honestly, more often than not, people don't have those conditions present when they're recommended this particular strategy. That's exactly what I break down in this next video here, where I walk through the 5 conditions that I would look for before I ever recommended anyone convert a single dollar to a Roth IRA. I'll see you there next.